Tim, welcome to the show, man. You wrote the book, History Echoes Bitcoin. And I'm reading this book, and I love history, and obviously we love Bitcoin. So those two concepts coalescing together it's a great book, and it reminds me, and I think you should take this as a high compliment. I don't know if either of you guys have read this book called Lessons of History by Will Durant. It's it's very similar to yours, and it's like short essays on different topics. This book is phenomenal, and the fact that your book reminded me of it is, I think, high praise. And if anyone hasn't read either of these books, you should read them both. They're both incredible history books and really well done.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me, by the way. Appreciate that.
For sure.
Yeah, we're delighted to have you. It's a fun, interesting, very important angle. I think this kind of book and this theme that we're going to explore today really peels back the magnitude of Bitcoin. Like, there's probably a newcomer or two out there listening that's like, I thought this was just some stupid, quickly passing fad of fake internet money. And this is the kind of book that's saying, no, this whole decentralized protocol thing we call Bitcoin, it's hitting on some of the deepest, most powerful and important threads that date back through the history of our species. And I mean, even if Bitcoin doesn't work, I think we learn a lot from Bitcoin. Obviously, the three of us think Bitcoin's going to work. But my takeaway from reading this book is just a healthy reminder when I finished it. Bitcoin is a really, really big fucking idea.
It is. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, from what you're saying, it makes me think of the phrase in Bitcoin, zoom out. so many in Bitcoin, we tend to hyper focus on the little things, on the details of code or whatever, the 21 million, this, that. But when you zoom out far enough, you see how all of these ideas, all of the properties that are expressed in Bitcoin, they've been with us kind of throughout history. We've been wanting to be free of asking for permission or being censored or whatever. And when you zoom out far enough, you're, forest for the trees kind of thing, you're able to see how this all kind of comes together.
Yeah, 100%. Before we go too deep, let's rewind for a second.
Yeah, man.
Who the hell are you? What do you do? You kind of have a little bit of an interesting story. We've never had anyone on here that's teaching music to kindergartners, Josh. So, Tim, who are you? Introduce yourself.
I'm Tim Niemeyer. I'm from Central Illinois. I grew up around here. My father was a farmer. I did a few years on that. I was thinking either do I want to be a farmer my whole life or do I want to see the world? So I ended up going in the Air Force, spent a couple years in Japan, traveled around a little bit. And then after a tour of service, I decided to go to college, got into psychology, got into elementary educating. I've been a musician throughout that whole time, guitarist. And just in the last 4 years of my teaching career, there was an opening for an elementary music position. So I jumped on that and been teaching that. I absolutely love it. But the Bitcoin side of that started closer to 2018. And by 2020, me and my co-host, Dan Rentmeister, we started Lincoln Land Bitcoin here in Springfield. So, I like to say elementary teacher by day, Bitcoiner by night, kind of thing.
Yeah. So having been in the Air Force, you've had that experience of like the camaraderie of people that you're around and like been to probably an Air Force wedding or two. Dan and I'm just going to go down this tangent for a second here because I know Dan wants to talk about this and I do too for a second. We've got a wedding we're going to tonight for a guy who he's great, but we just know this is going to get wild because there's probably like 10 or 20 firemen going to be at this wedding, Dan, and they're all probably, borderline alcoholics who are going to get blackout drunk. It's going to be pretty hilarious.
Tomorrow morning.
Yeah. Tomorrow morning is going to be rough.
On the spectrum,
Austin made mention yesterday when we were at training about people turning into a mongoloid. I think it's a reference to Rick and Morty, if anyone's familiar. Like, that's not off the table whatsoever. Like, could happen. I don't plan on it ever happening, but it does subtly transition at some point.
Yeah, we've talked on the show before, Tim. You know, Josh doesn't drink a whole lot, to be honest. Like in the normal cadence of Josh's life, alcohol is not a big theme. But when it rears its, I'm going to say, wonderful head, it gets bizarre. I mean, I have said on Blue Collar Bitcoin before, he gets to a point where I can see it in his eyes where his soul leaves his body. And the more time I spent with Josh, the more I enjoy pinpointing and announcing to everyone else that juncture has been reached. The soul is no longer with us. Be careful. But yeah, tonight, I think in the spectrum of fire department weddings, I think tonight, Josh, could be, and you don't know until you're there, until the party gets started. We don't know anything about the DJ. We don't know anything about the vibe, but I think this has the potential to be on the rowdier end of the spectrum. And I am mentally and physically preparing. I got a great night's rest last night. I got a workout in, going to flex the intellectual muscle here, but it has the potential to be weird, exhausting, and amazing.
There are going to be some numb frontal cortexes here in 6 hours or so.
Sure.
Just, let me ask: do firefighters, do they get like aggressive when they get drunk? Is that an overstatement? Or
no, I think there's a lot.
There are some outliers that I could pick out that would, but I don't think any of them are going to be there. I think they're going to be some pretty gentle drunks, you know?
Yeah. There's a lot of loving. There's a lot of loving at our department. And to be clear, like I think we work at a very special place. I know probably everybody feels that way about their department, but it is a really wonderful group of people, a group that Josh and I love spending time with. And yeah, I enjoy spending time with everyone. And I think there's an element to it in our line of work where some of those social frictions and anxieties disappear because we know each other so well. When you live together, work together in these environments, brush your teeth next to each other, shit in the same bathroom as each other every third day, you can't pretend to be someone you're not. Like everybody that I work with at the department, not just Josh, like everyone that I've worked close with, they can pinpoint what I'm good at, what I'm bad at. There's no hiding it. And so when you go on trips with these guys or you're in social environments with these guys, you're not trying to prove anything to anyone because everybody already knows the full deal. You kind of agree with that, Josh?
Oh, yeah, 100%. There's been ideas floating around that we should, the gentleman who's getting married, his name's Adam. And we're thinking about maybe floating the idea or like kind of introducing the idea to him that there's this underground swingers club at our department that he's not aware of, but now that he's getting married, we're going to we've got this like group of like 6 or 7 people that are in on this joke, and we're going to try to insinuate to him gently and then more forcefully throughout the night, like, hey, are you getting into this club or what? Like,
you got to decide tonight, like tonight's the night. I think the goal here is to introduce it. He'll think it's a joke, but then have enough people repeat it and do a good enough acting, which Josh, I'll try to do my best tonight.
Yeah, I'll do my best.
To make him be like, holy shit, are these guys serious? Yeah, it's going to be a special night. Thanks for listening to us.
Yeah, thanks
talk
for
about what's coming on here.
I'm interested. Like, do you orange pill early, middle, often of the night? Do you have like a time where it's like we're drunk enough but not too drunk to really bring up Bitcoin?
I think everybody there is already apprised of that situation. We won't even have to broach that there. Like people will just be like, shut the fuck up. We've heard enough of this. We've listened to enough of your podcast.
Well, and truthfully, most of the people going to this wedding own Bitcoin. A lot of them are
most of them do.
So it's some of the people that are in and know and have heard us talk for years now. They're the ones that are sick of it. They're like, I fucking get it, guys. I get it. I understand the value proposition. And in terms of when it comes out, I typically go to an event like this thinking, I'm unplugging. I'm not going to talk about Bitcoin. But then when the inhibitions get lost, that's when I can't help myself and I want to talk about Bitcoin. So we'll see.
Have you thought about mining Bitcoin, but you thought that maybe the equipment was too expensive or that running your own miner might be just a bit too technical? Maybe you thought it'd be cool, but the cost of energy where you live just makes it pointless. This is where HeatBit comes in. You can kill 3 birds with 1 stone with this device. It's a Bitcoin miner, a heater, and an air purifier all in one. It's a plug-and-play device that could not be easier to operate. It has the latest 5 nanometer chips that make it one of the most efficient Bitcoin miners in the world. Heatbit also operates quietly. Good luck selling the idea to your wife that you're going to plug in a bunch of Bitcoin miners in your basement that operate at the volume of a lawnmower. Not going to happen. Heatbit operates silently while keeping your significant other warm and cozy. Heatbit cares about your marriage. So, if you want to mine Bitcoin and remain married, order a Heatbit and keep warm while it pays for its own energy bill. Use code BCB to receive 5% off a Heatbit. That's code BCB. Man, there's so much. I mean, you've covered such a wide breadth of history with this book. It was really hard after reading it for us to distill down like what particular part should we talk about. And yeah, I don't know where to start here. Dan, what do you think?
Yeah, I want to start just with the general concept of the book. The title, as we've established, is History Echoes Bitcoin. You have a quote in the book. I think it's towards the end of the book. The properties of Bitcoin have always been with us. I'm going to ask you just the broad question. Why do you feel history echoes Bitcoin? What do you mean by that phrase? There's just the title of the book.
So if you look at the arc of history, and like I said, you zoom out enough, you see repeated episodes of humanity searching for a solution to various problems. So I have, I think, 8 chapters, and they are the properties that are expressed in Bitcoin. So like permissionlessness. We've always been trying to find a way to be able to act without needing permission. We've always been trying to implement some kind of governance structure that respects all participants, like decentralization. There's always that consistent creep of centralization that we always have to fight against. Trust minimization. We've always been trying to verify the truth free of trust. We've been trying to able to speak freely without being censored. Like immutability, trying to find a way to preserve an accurate representation of records. And scarcity. I mean, we had that for a while with the gold standard, but determining the best way to store and share our time and energy. Those things, those properties have always been with us. So if that's true, to varying degrees, we now have a protocol that expresses all of them simultaneously. I could have said the need for all of these properties have always been with us, I guess you'd say.
Yeah, but this is the best instantiation of those different characteristics that we've sought after throughout history being coalesced into one unit, one perfect, well, as close to perfect money as we've been able to create as humanity thus far. And I think you did a great job of spelling that out in this book through each one of these characteristics.
Thank you.
I think when we talk about the phrase unfair, when you think about what's wrong with the world and what's wrong with how we organize humanity, fairness is, I think, a key theme. Things get imbalanced and unfair. If you look at slavery, right, and lack of freedoms, power is lopsided, right? And I think one of the most powerful realizations for people about Bitcoin that you explore a lot in this book is that this is a new technology enabled by the digital age, enabled by it's an amalgamation of numerous technologies that are currently and may continue to allow us to thwart some of the negatives of humanity. If you give one human too much control, if you give a group of humans too much control, given enough time, that is always, not sometimes, always a problem, right?
Absolutely.
And so we need to find technologies. If it's Bitcoin, great. It's looking like it's going to be that way. But increasingly, if we want more fairness for society, we need to inhibit small groups of people gaining lopsided control. But that is so much easier said than done. We don't have to get here right now, but Josh, you sent him a question that I thought was great, getting into just democracy in general, how we organize. Like there's pros and cons to all these things, and there's a lot of cons to democracy, and there's cons to spreading out control if the solution's not workable. Here comes a workable solution to spread power and control.
I was thinking about the way you said that. I'm not sure fairness is the correct word to use, because fairness has such it's such a loaded word, and what's fair can be viewed very differently from one person to another. And I think maybe the more proper word to use is just, because if we can agree on what is just, fairness, like, we're all born unequal, right? We've got different talents. Some people can speak better, some people can write better, some people can, shoot a basketball from much further away and nail it. I can't do that necessarily.
Some people have giant cocks like me. It's
unbelievable.
A burden that
it is
bear.
Unfair. I don't feel like that's fair. You need to donate some of that cock to some other people.
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah, but I just think it's important to define terms at the beginning of this. And I think justice is a more fine-tuned word for what we're talking about than fairness, especially because, especially in the last 5 years, I feel the word fair has gotten so overused. Like, it's not fair, this or that. When you know what I'm saying?
On top of that, you could even use the word consistent. Like,
sure.
The changing of the rules. Whoever has control of the rule set can change the rules at will. I wrote an article for Bitcoin Magazine as a guest contributor a while back, and I talked about that in the context of baseball. Like, imagine if you're not only a player, but the manager, but the ump, the rule maker, the scorekeeper, and you had the ability to change at will. You never know from one second to the next what game you're playing, because you get to change the rules. So, I mean, so in Bitcoin, that the decentralization that Dan talked about and the fairness that you talked about, Josh, that all kind of comes together because nobody can fuck with the rules. It's consistent.
Totally. What you just said made me think of another quote from the book, which was, by giving your side the ability to subdue whatever they want, you're tacitly giving the same power to the other side when they return to power. And this just makes me think about the beauty of a development or a movement that causes us to zoom out on time frame, which I think Bitcoin does. It obviously, we're zooming out on history in the past, and we're thinking much longer term about the future. And although a lot of motivations are pure, people are trying to seize control or censor or redistribute. It sounds like a good idea short term, but a lot of the trends that you highlight in this book that we're seeing in the 21st century, maybe even more dramatically, the more centralization you have, that may be fine and good in the short term with the leader in control that you like. But think about it flipping over to the other side. Like, if we just pick on one example here, I would say to liberals, if you give your favorite liberal politician a ton of power, think about that flipping the other way. Think about Trump getting reelected and having those same exact powers. And this is part of the reason it's imperative that we dig into and build on systems that zoom out on the time frame.
Which kind of speaks to how do you want to say that? Because if you give one side control, you're giving the other side control, and we are because of our high time preference mindset, because of the fiat system perpetuating that, we are zoomed in. We aren't able to see the forest from the trees. We aren't able to see the next the second and third iteration of whatever that is. So the fiat standard is what enables that ability to keep taking more and more control, that consistent creep of centralization, like we mentioned.
For sure. Yeah. I think this would be an interesting point to dig into examples in history that you provide in this book of solutions that have been workable and have allowed for cooperation and flourishing and justice. One of our favorite parts of the book was you talking about this great council of the Six Nations.
Yeah.
Can you speak a little bit about what is this? What period in history? What can we learn from it?
So Native Americans, I'll probably mispronounce this, Haudenosaunee, the Great Council of the Six Nations, back before America. They needed a solution. They had wars. They fought over territories. They fought over resources. It's natural. They created what's called a participatory democracy, and they dubbed it the Great Plan of Peace. Each tribe would live their own lives. while defending each other's property rights. That was the end result. And the simplicity of that plan was where the magic happens. It took a long and arduous process to get some kind of unanimous decision, but when they did, everybody followed it. It was a simple rule set, similar to Bitcoin, right? Simple rule set. It worked so well that Ben Franklin ended up choosing that model as the basis of the Constitution.
Crazy.
Yeah, that was something that you mentioned that I did some more research on afterwards. And it's amazing, like the fact that they thought of that having, I think, was it 6 different tribes of Native Americans that had all basically agreed to run as individuals, but then to have a centralized leadership of power that they all agreed on. And that's exactly how they structured the United States. The 13 colonies were all independent, sovereign states who then had this centralized power, the federal government, that was initially just for defensive purposes. It was just for, if we get in a scrap with another country, we can then, coalesce our powers into enough force and enough centralization to be useful in a kind of conflict that where centralization of power is a necessity to a degree. And then after that conflict is over, we can resume operations as our independent states. And yeah, it's a really inspiring way that we came up with this constitution that we implemented for our country.
Yeah, it's quality of rules over quantity. Fewer overarching rules instead of more and nitpicky. It's similar to like the non-aggression principle that libertarians speak of. It's similar to the golden rule, from religion, do unto others. It's a very simple thought. I mean, and same thing with Bitcoin's white paper. When you compare that to like the legal code surrounding the US dollar, right? Simplicity. Just go ahead, Dan.
Yeah. And the other thought I had, and I made a note in the side here when reading this section about the 6 nations, was that amazing ideas and inventions that lead to paradigm shifts generally don't happen on accident. So when we think about the United States of America, an absolutely unbelievable idea, especially in its time, for how to organize human beings. Tons of checks and balances, a lot of relinquishing of power by elites. I mean, think about the guys that set this system up. I know it was wildly imperfect, especially when we think about like human rights here in the 21st century, but in its context, in its time, it's amazing that a bunch of really rich white dudes basically set up a system that distributed control extraordinarily, right? They didn't just get in a room and say, hey, put the 12 of us in control, right? So I'm saying remarkable idea, didn't happen on accident. Back to the Ben Franklin thing. He literally invited the council in 1765 to the New Albany Convention to describe how they were organizing themselves, because he had the intuition and he'd taken in different options. And so these guys brought a lot of things into their idea of how to organize the United States of America. The same is true of Bitcoin. Bitcoin didn't happen on accident. It didn't come completely out of the blue. It's something that cypherpunks had ideated on and tried and iterated on for a long time to create the protocol that we know as Bitcoin. So it's easy to just think, oh, US popped out of nowhere. Bitcoin popped out of nowhere. That's not how this stuff happens. And that's not generally how great ideas come to the surface.
Yeah. And it's also a good reason to stay vigilant in Bitcoin. Because as we saw, this constitution has existed for 250 some odd years. It started out very decentralized. And as over the years, this creep has happened with politicians reaching for more power. It's just a natural human want for more, right? More power, more influence, more potential corruption going on. And slowly and surely, this federal government has turned into a much more powerful entity than it was ever conceived of from the origination of all of this. And it's very similar to how Bitcoin has, it started out extremely centralized, has remained extremely centralized, has rule sets that are much more difficult to overcome than just, law on paper, the way we have our Constitution. But it took a long, long, long time for the Constitution to really come under serious fire, probably arguably the Civil War. But what I'm getting at, though, is that vigilance is the price that we need to pay to keep this thing the way it is, the way we want it to be, because there's nothing guaranteeing that it always remains this unsoiled white linen that we see it as right now. It can be sullied, like that tablecloth at that wedding tonight will be.
Yeah, we do not want to take a shit in the beautiful Bitcoin diaper. We do not. We want it to remain pure. One thing I'm going to make this a question here to you, Tim, is you talk some about in this book repeatedly at different sections about basically control being seized and centralization occurring in times of crisis. What are some things that come to mind either in the book or outside the book for you? It's like these are key landmarks in history of times when control has been seized and a system has been soiled because of a quote unquote crisis.
So like the sheets on a cot and on the way to the hospital.
Yeah. I feel for you guys. I feel for whoever's in that ambulance is who I feel for. Winston Churchill's quote. Yeah, Winston Churchill's quote: "Never let a good crisis go to waste." Right.
That
right
been
there,
repeated by a lot of politicians.
Which is funny. They're saying the quiet part out loud.
Yes,
but I mean, a case could be made for. Let's think back. What was it? The WMDs. Remember, that
classic
led to further military imperialism. The financial crisis, everything's now too big to fail. You guys even talked with Hoddle about the World Trade Center attacks. About
huge situation. Yeah, right. You get into the Patriot Act stuff,
everything that it's been. It's still here. 20 some odd years later, the Patriot Act still exists.
Even recently, like the Canadian truckers convoy will shut off your bank accounts because of free speech. The whole FTX shitstorm. Now there's the regulatory solutions to that. Cow farts are killing the planet. What, they're going to try and control every aspect of our lives, and because they can. And the phrase that I always think of is like, legal doesn't mean moral, right? I don't know if you guys agree with that concept, but
oh, for sure.
Just because they're behind the cloak of legality, they just say they're more moral, and that's not actually how it works.
For sure. Yeah.
That's how statecraft works around the world. Like nobody would agree that it's moral for me to go overpower my neighbor and take his house, but states literally do that on a daily basis. Russia is in the process of doing that to Ukraine right now, but on that state level, it seems to be, not that people accept it as good or moral or anything, but those moral concepts kind of go out the window in a lot of state action in ways that, especially with the propaganda, convinces people that in the WMD situation, like, oh, there is potentially, this intel that says these exist there, so we have the moral obligation to go take them away. Having that not been the case, but they just wash their hands of it and walk away. We can't do that as individuals, but states can get away with that kind of action.
Folks, when a fellow firefighter, family member, or friend asks us where we buy Bitcoin, we point them to Swan. It's the place Josh and I have dollar cost averaged into Bitcoin for years. At Swan Bitcoin, you can set up automated Bitcoin savings plans as well as execute instant purchases. They serve clients of any size, from firefighters to institutional investors, and an account is startlingly easy to set up. I've watched a fireman do it on a smartphone while sitting in a recliner in less than 7 minutes. Swan also offers Bitcoin IRAs. You can start or roll over a traditional or Roth IRA with enterprise-grade custody, attentive service, easy onboarding, and transparent fees. Lastly, Swan will be hosting the Pacific Bitcoin Festival October 5th through 6th in Los Angeles this year. The two of us will be attending and speaking. Come join us. Visit pacificbitcoin.com for tickets and visit swan.com for details on everything that Swan offers. Ladies and gents, the fact is that Bitcoin remains decentralized because its ledger is distributed all across the globe. The thousands of computers that keep track of who owns what and ensure the accuracy of the Bitcoin blockchain are the nodes. You ought to be verifying your own transactions and balances, as well as enforcing the consensus rules yourself. The software and hardware we use to run Bitcoin nodes is StartOS by Start9 Labs. With StartOS, you can fire up a full Bitcoin node in a very easy plug-and-play fashion, but you can also do way more. Start9 gives you optional capabilities to run a full-blown private server, allowing you to easily and incrementally level up and opt out of today's increasingly centralized and alarmingly censored cloud computing model. Just as Windows and Mac OS made it possible for anyone to run their own personal computer, StartOS makes it possible for anyone to have their own personal server. Run a Bitcoin node, run a Lightning node, run a NOSTR relay, control your own photos, videos, and messages, and much more. Check it all out at start9.com. For sure. And think about what's been legal in the past. I mean, this is where even just a brief trip down history lane get your eyebrows up, and you're reminded, 155 years ago, slavery was legal. It was legal to own another human being. Think about how freaking far we've come since then. And there are things that are currently normal, ubiquitous, legal, seem to be, societally accepted, that won't be in the future. I think one of the leading things in that is that the supply and price of money is controlled by a few dudes that meet once a month. Like, I think that will look as anachronistic as some of these crazy things we look back on history that was just the water everyone was swimming in.
Well, and it's so prevalent. I mean, wasn't it Gladstein said something like, I'll mess up the numbers, but half of the world is living under authoritarian control.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just crazy obviously to us, because, we have a better situation here, but hopefully down the road in the future, that will be considered as crazy as some of these other levels of control.
One of the most stark contrasts in the world, and you talk about it in the book, in A Tale of Two Koreas, is the stark difference between North and South Korea. And historically, North Korea was, communist stronghold. The Soviet Union had influenced there. South Korea was U.S. influenced. They had the whole Korean conflict. And then the DMZ was created where, there's a stalemate for the last 60 to 70 years. But you can see the stark difference in the economy. I mean, when you see capitalism flourishing in South Korea is producing, Samsung's producing electronics for the entire world. There's huge corporations and huge wealth and influence going on from South Korea. There's the same people on the same piece of land with nothing different than simply the political organization and the politics about how they are run. And the North Koreans are starving, being fed propaganda through their schools. It's a stark contrast even from night, from space. You can see how many lights are lit up in South Korea, how many lights in North Korea. Just from that metric, you can determine a massive wealth differential between these two countries. And it, again, is just back to politics and power and centralization and control. One is a massively centralized dictatorship. The other is a decentralized democratic republic. And the difference couldn't be more stark. And I can't think of another place in the world where you can see the highlighted difference so contrasted.
Yeah. When I was researching that, and I put that in the permissionless chapter, but that could be in the decentralization chapter. But it kind of, the history of North and South Korea kind of read like a dysfunctional relationship with the northern communists being in like the abusive partner. Like, imagine those two Koreas going on a date. Like, you sit here, I order for you. I told you to wear the red dress. It's like, it was just so much control, and South Koreans had to basically ask for permission. Of course, we're going to have to split away from that. Anybody should in a situation like, in a relationship like that. Yeah.
And we've talked about this a whole lot, and this human incentives really are the mover of the world. If you give people the right incentive set, they will produce. They will produce wealth for themselves and their country, and the society benefits from that. If you take away that impetus from people to be able to make themselves better, knowing that anything that I produce, anything that I do, will simply be taken from me. In North Korea, you said that even the houses they're in are owned by the North Korean state, by Kim Jong-un or whatever his name is.
Right.
His picture is on the wall of every schoolhouse, of every school room. These kids have to worship this dear leader. And they know, or maybe they don't outright know, but they understand that there is no real future for anything I produce. It's just going to be taken from me. So what incentive do I have to produce or be better? It's really better to just blend in, because if you stand out in any way, you're much more likely to get smashed by the hammer than if you just blend in with the crowd. Don't do anything outstanding, because that's more likely to get you in trouble than not. And the complete opposite is true in the South.
You know, the phrase Bitcoin fixes this. I really think it incentivizes this, because what you're talking about is incentives. Take these incentives away. What is there to do? And free societies lead to an increased quality of life for that very reason. Controlled societies lead to a decreased quality of life for that very reason.
That's something that really has, I guess, maybe it's just China hasn't had enough tenure yet to really. The one thing about China that I am confused about is, so there's a great firewall. They hold all this information they keep their people from the influence of the world. They seem to have figured out enough capitalism to sprinkle in there to keep the motor going, but not enough to allow people to have the freedom to have free speech or freedom of movement and those types of things. I guess what I'm saying is when does that hammer drop for China? Have they figured out a mix where it could last longer than it otherwise should? You know what I mean?
Right.
Just ruminating about this, because I've often wondered about how China is as successful as they are with the kind of, steel fist in the velvet glove that they're operating with.
They have a governor on their productivity engine, is the way I would think about it. So that's the beauty of looking at systems that work, right? And systems that work have shown themselves, as you talk about in this book, to kind of reflect and echo nature. It's like just a bunch of organisms out doing their own shit, looking for their own best interest and cooperating. So self-interested cooperation leads to an enormous amount of productivity. It's why our species is where it's at. And if you look at certainly North Korea, it's the most dramatic example of just someone has put gas in the diesel tank in North Korea, and the engine just doesn't run. They're totally hampered from a productivity standpoint because of how centralized they are. As you said, there's enough capitalism injected into the Chinese economy, and they've been given a great deck. I mean, they're in a great spot in the world with a ton of different people. But I do have the same question. Like, that was one of my main thoughts, Josh, reading Changing World Order by Dalio, is like, because of how centralized this is and how hampered they're going to be to really be able to properly price goods and allocate resources and all these things, are they going to be hampered long term? It's a very good question. And that's one of the beauties of Bitcoin too. And just free markets in general and capitalism, is that they're not only just, but they're productive.
It's also
when
helpful.
Those two things meet together, it's an absolutely gorgeous thing.
Tell me what you think of this thought as well, Tim. It's also helpful to remember that the Soviet Union, even into the mid 80s, there were academics in the US who said, this thing is going to overtake us. It is just a monster that is just efficient and it's killing it. But inside that country, they were literally falling apart, but nobody outside of it knew that. They were able to keep a lid on the truth that they were literally just in shambles right up until the last moment when they actually fell. And I had another example of that in my head, but I just escaped me.
A car. We have a car. We're driving down the highway, and we figured out how to put the gas tank on full at all times. Hey,
right. The reality of the situation is different.
We got this, and then who knows when the fumes are gonna go out.
Right. It was the other one is Japan. In the mid 80s to early 90s, everybody thought Japan was going to rule the world. And then suddenly the brakes just slammed on their economy, and they're doing fine. Don't get me wrong, but they didn't turn into this economic juggernaut that everyone had anticipated they were going to be. They hit a wall.
Wasn't there, aren't they the leaders in debt to GDP? Like, they were the first ones to cross that chasm.
130%.
Yeah.
People generally call it. Yeah.
They went fold that clown before everyone else. One of the thoughts I just wanted to throw out here dealing with incentives that came to mind was just parenting. I think we're seeing, and we'd have to ask someone that's been on this earth longer than us, but it seems that there's a trend towards a very soft, supple young adult that has no idea how to really survive in the wild. I mean, I am in absolute disbelief, and we talked about this with Huddle last week. It's just the number of grown ass men and women who are completely beholden to the milk from their parents' teat, way into adulthood. We're not talking about adolescents or people in their low 20s. We're talking people that have no direction, no motivation into well into their 30s. And it gets me back to thinking about this seizing control in times of struggle, right? If that is your mantra as a parent of, hey, anytime my kid's having a hard go, I'm just going to step in. Oh, look, Tim and his new wife, Angelica, can't afford the down payment on their house, so we're going to step in and help them. That's not good for them, right? Because now they're not assessing reality properly. Oh, Johnny lost his job at Home Depot, so he's shacked up with us now. Well, Home Depot was a fake job anyways. Johnny needs to go figure out a trajectory. It's like if you take that up to the nation state level, we have systems that allow this, and everybody wants this. And so it's just take it, as we say on the show a lot, distill it down to the individual. If you, let's make it you, if you don't have the proper incentives, right? If I have flaming hot Cheetos and popcorn whenever I want in the basement and I never have to work a day in my life, I'm going to become a fat piece of shit. And that is what is happening in society. I think a lot of it is fiat enabled when we distill it down to what is the root cause. There's always a bailout, and the balloon keeps getting bigger until it pops. I'll get off my soapbox.
There's two things that you made me think about. And you're speaking of sovereignty, right? And sovereignty gives you that incentive structure back. I was fiat mindset for the majority of my life, right? I fiat foods. Actually, Bitcoin, the sovereignty that I gained from Bitcoin kind of led to the health sovereignty that I've experienced over the last few years, right? Because now I have that incentive to learn about it and to take action on it. The other thought is I wrote another article about helicopter parents and snowflake kids, and you're right, it's institutionalized paternalism is what it is. Because if you are always suckling from the teat, and your kids see that, they see that as that's supposed to be the norm. That's the normal behavior, and that's just perpetuated into future generations.
Yeah. This reminds me of this has been attributed to a lot of different people, and it's basically the thesis of the fourth turning, which is the good men make easy times make weak men make hard times, and that whole cyclical cycle. It just reminds me of that, and I feel like we are in the midst of this transition between weak men and tough times, and again, maybe that's like a rough guide for how these things work, but I do feel a lot of history is cyclical, and that is a cycle that seems to repeat itself throughout history over and over again. We don't learn this lesson, and I guess it's really impossible to, because in order to really, for any individual to learn this kind of a lesson, they have to either A, study a lot of history, or B, have lived this. And it's impossible to have a lifetime spanning long enough to really truly understand these concepts. And so we end up back where we are with coddling, making weak people because we just coddle them to death where they don't have to produce. And then we're surprised when the production doesn't happen.
Yes.
Exactly.
Tim, what period in history do you feel this date and time is most similar to? Based on your studies and assessment, what period would you compare the 2020s to?
So that's funny that you mentioned the fourth turning, because when I was mentally preparing for this, I was thinking that exact thought about the fourth turning. I don't know. I wonder. I'd like to go back in that book and get specific, what was that time, that era, that was that last fourth turning, and kind of really dig in on that. That would be an interesting comparison to compare that last fourth turning to this one more in depth. But like in terms of what I wrote about in the book, I'd also be interested to see what life was like immediately after the printing press. Because remember, the printing press decentralized information, right? But you got to think, when a new tool is built, you might not know how to use it properly. There might be some errors. Somebody might hurt themselves with it. So I don't have a solid answer for that, but I got to think.
I don't think,
like you said, Josh, those people that have been coddled, how do they come out of that? How do they break out of that mold and step up and say, okay, now I'm going to take charge? If you're not used to that, that's got to be a messy thing. That's probably why there's always some kind of skirmish or conflict in between the turnings.
Yeah, and everyone always thinks this time is different, and it always is a variation. It's never going to be exactly the same. And the thing that I think we would all agree on that is very different now, especially versus like anything even relatively historic, is information moves so quickly now. So I feel like these cycles could move potentially much faster than they ever have in the past. We might not see the same longevity of a 20-year span for some of these things. It might happen in 5 years. It might happen in 1 year. That is, I think, and then there's all these other variables that we're throwing in now, like artificial intelligence and the productivity gains from that. There's so many variables that for us to sit here and say, oh, this is the fourth turning and things are going to get rough for the next 20 years and we're kind of fucked and we're going to have to deal with a lot of shit. Like, we could be completely wrong. Well, this might actually might be a new
renaissance.
Renaissance is the word I'm looking for. Thanks.
We also have the inertia from the previous, from our previous experiences, the previous turning, whatever you want to say, it's kind of like the idea of when you're searching for what career you're going to go into. Well, the career that you're probably going to have is not even created yet, right? But you're still going towards a different goal. So we're not aiming at where the target will be. We're aiming where the target is, in a way.
Howdy, plebs. It is Dan here. I want to take a minute to talk to you about Crowd Health. What Crowd Health is doing in the healthcare space is nothing short of remarkable. If you're already familiar with Crowd Health, you can visit joincrowdhealth.com/BCB and use code BLUE for a tantalizing 3-month trial discount. As you probably know by now, the two of us are career firefighter paramedics. Nearly 70% of our calls are medical related, and we both rotate over to an ambulance. We're the first link in the chain in the healthcare system, and we see just how broken it is. Injured and sick patients stressed out of their mind, primarily worried about the incoming hospital bill. Crowd Health offers an extremely simplistic and workable alternative to traditional healthcare setups for a freaking fraction of typical premiums. It's essentially the decentralization of healthcare, leveraging the power of Bitcoin alongside healthcare crowdfunding to drastically uncomplicate healthcare and give back control to patients. Crowd Health negotiates bills for their members and finds them the best doctors and hospitals. Do yourself a favor. Visit joincrowdhealth.com/BCB. That's joincrowdhealth.com/BCB. And use code BLUE during sign up to receive a max discount crowdfunding request of $49 a month. Yes, $49 for the first 3 months. The Blue Collar Bitcoin podcast is brought to you by arguably the most legendary company in Bitcoin, CoinKite. They are the producers of the renowned Cold Card, the world's most trusted and secure Bitcoin signing device, built with a plethora of features fit for Bitcoin beginners all the way up to the most advanced of users. This device is a one-stop shop for your Bitcoin custody needs, and something the two of us have trusted for years. CoinKite also manufactures the Block Lock, a gorgeous e-ink digital display art piece sitting in the background of what seems to be every serious Bitcoiner on the planet. Block Lock can be programmed to scroll through key Bitcoin metrics including price, hash rate, next halving date, and much more. Boy, oh boy, will this thing look good in your living room or office. They're also the makers of many other security and fun products for all users, no matter their technical aptitude. Support our show and get a delicious discount on CoinKite products by following our affiliate link on the screen and in the notes, and using code BCB for 5% off the Cold Card.
For sure. I've thought that quite a bit recently about school for my kids and stuff. There's so many useless things they're learning because I mean, number one, there's no way to
Not
know what 20
elementary
years from now
music,
is going to look
not
like.
elementary music. That's
No,
important.
definitely not. I think music is something people need in general. It has to
Oh, brain
happen. Like
development,
that's not
it
going to
helps
change.
math skills. There's research that
Yeah.
shows that, like, if you engage in music, your math scores go up. Anyway.
Yeah. Hey, I have this quote that I wanted to bring up. I should have done it a little earlier when we were talking about incentives, but when I was reading parts of your book, it reminded me of Adam Smith's book, The Wealth of Nations. It's an old book from, it was like 250 years old, but there's so many good nuggets out of this book. And his quote is, so this is talking about individual incentives and how that's structured. Every individual neither intends to promote the public interest nor knows how much he is promoting it. He intends only his own security, and by directing that industry in such a manner as to produce its greatest value, he intends only his own gain. But in this, and in many other cases, led by an invisible hand to promote an end which was no part of his intention. So he's basically saying all of us following our own incentives to produce for ourselves are all collectively attributing to this whole of society without even intending to. That's his entire invisible hand idea from that book. And that is, in a nutshell, what it is that animates people, what it is that gets us up in the morning to go to work, to produce something to bring home for our family, but also in doing so, we're producing for an entire whole of society. We're driving old ladies to the hospital. You're teaching kids music. I mean, we're all helping the whole with simply our own self-interest.
And that's the word right there, self-interest. There's so many people that conflate self-interest with selfishness. To me, the difference, selfishness, is you're doing a self-want that will end up hurting somebody else, right? That's selfish. Where self-interest is, I'm just going back to incentives. I'm incentivized to do this for whatever reason. And that helps everybody out. If everybody, it's more robust of a system as opposed to that more centrally controlled system where it's like, you do this, you do that, because we say so. It's only a few brains trying to solve all of the world's problems, as opposed to letting all of the brains of society kind of figure out their niche.
Exactly.
Yes, but for all of the brains to work in tandem, we do need tools and systems that allow for cooperation. If you go back to Neanderthal, right, they don't have the advent of monetary tools, right? And like one example I was thinking about reading Lynn's book, Broken Money, which we're both in the middle of, is banking was a remarkable and still in many ways is a remarkable idea and a very, very necessary tool for humans to cooperate with value transfer across time and space. Like it's a giant step forward in terms of the abstractions are very helpful for commerce to move quicker and for people to specialize in all these things. So you go through like the upgrades in monetary history, like coinage, banking. Now, the three of us believe we have another huge upgrade, that being Bitcoin. But it's not like these things it's not like cooperation can just happen out of the blue. I mean, yes, it is an organic process that emerges over centuries. But I think one of the greatest gifts Bitcoin gives us, it's a huge upgrade. It's a tool upgrade in human cooperation, and that's why it's such a big deal. It allows for the hive mind to fire on all cylinders.
And how many cavemen, when they first saw the wheel, thought of it like a paperweight or something? You know what I mean? Like they had no idea how to conceptualize that, and it takes time, not for just the idea to be created, but then for everybody to conceptualize how does that idea help us on the whole. And that's kind of where we're at now.
Yeah. You can't underestimate how challenging it is to wrap your head around totally new, otherworldly ideas and concepts. I actually remember I've spent, now as the years have gone on, a fair amount of time explaining Bitcoin to my parents. And my mom is very, very intelligent, one of the most well-read human beings I've ever been around, but just doesn't care about money at all, which is totally fine. I think that's great. Her interests are in music. She plays a ton of piano. She was a music major. She loves theology, all these other things. But as she was listening to me one night, I think this was about a year ago, it kind of clicked for her, like, especially from the human rights angle. I was kind of going HRF, Gladstein, talking about the third world and Africa, and just kind of how big of an idea Bitcoin is. And basically she said, I think the problem right now is it's such a big idea and it's so much different than everything we're all used to that it's almost impossible. I think she used the word impossible for people to get it right now. And I think that's a very astute statement from someone that doesn't know a ton about Bitcoin. I completely agree. And I think that reality is part of the reason that the timeline could be elongated here more than people think. You could have arrived at the station a long, long time before the next train comes in. Like maybe it's years away, maybe it's decades away.
I think that's a true statement, especially for her generation. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And as you work your way back from that generation down to the millennials and Zoomers, I think it becomes more second nature for them to understand this just because of the nature of their exposure to technology and the comfort level, honestly, with technology.
Right.
And I mean, I know you feel this, Dan. I'm sure all three of us have experienced this now, but like you meet someone who's 20 years old, they have an entire, and this really makes me feel old when you start hearing them like use terms and words. You're like, I have no idea what the fuck they're talking about, and they're speaking English. And you're like, holy shit, like imagine removing 2 or 3 generations from me. I'm not going to be able to understand what it is they're saying at all. I'm not even going to be able to infer a lot of it because it's just so foreign to me. So then I picture myself in that age range that your mom is in, and I'm like, okay, I totally understand why she views it that way.
It's similar to seeing that new trend on whatever social media where they're like getting the people. I don't even know what it is.
Are you talking about?
Yep.
I know what you're talking about. Actually, that's exactly what I had in mind.
What is that?
I don't either. I don't know. It's very it's very fucking strange. It's very dystopian.
I'll do it for Bitcoin. Oh, can I clarify something?
Is there anything you won't do for Bitcoin though? Let's get that on the table.
Is that meatloaf? I'll do anything for Bitcoin, but I won't do that. We'll just leave it big.
Okay.
But I got to clarify. Yeah. I don't think cavemen used the wheel as paperweight. I don't think they had paper back then. I'm not a historian.
Yeah. Papyrus. They're papyrus weight.
Go. Yes. I love that.
There's one other question I wanted to get to. And you talked a bit about a lot of open source projects. Linus, am I pronouncing his last name right? Torvalds? Yeah. He basically created Linux, which is the OS in the world that underpins everything. Everything that really matters is underpinned by this. And you have guys like Gates and Jobs who made themselves billionaires from effectively the same technology, arguably worse technology, but they just marketed it much better and they monetized it. Clearly, that's the reason they made a lot of money off of it. But the thing that strikes me is there's always these people throughout history who you have to believe that. So if you believe that incentives guide everybody, then it's in their minds, they must feel that benefiting humanity is a better payment for their work than profiting for themselves personally from it. That's something that a lot of people, including myself, have a hard time with. Like, how can you create something so valuable, know that it's valuable, and just like Satoshi did, give it away, basically. Like Satoshi is sitting on 1 million Bitcoin or so. He has never taken any of it and sold it and profited from it, either because he's dead or some kind of an angelic being that isn't taking advantage of his own prosperity. How is it? This is a big question that I know none of us can really answer, but how do you factor that into the equation of incentives? How do we do that?
That's huge. Couple thoughts. One, like I was conflicted writing this chapter because, I have that basic kind of acceptance of capitalism is good. So I wasn't trying to really write anti-capitalist anything just by saying you should give everything away, but it was a interesting chapter nonetheless. But I mean, our current monetary system has kind of resulted in an oversized and unnecessary donor class, politicians, bureaucrats, middlemen, whatever.
Leeches, yeah.
How do you? I think of Jeff Booth's like concept of like ego death. You've heard him talk about that.
Yeah,
that's necessary to get from one step to the next to be able to give something away like that. in terms of like capital, like the technological innovation of Bitcoin, it's deflationary, right? Which long term is a good thing for society. It allows us to be more self-sovereign. We don't need the middlemen. If we accept and promote Bitcoin, it's like we're seeing human energy go to where it's best utilized. So if we want to be successful, not just now for ourselves, like that difference between self-interest and selfishness, but if we want to be able to zoom out and see our society, humanity move forward, I don't know how Satoshi was able to do that. I truly, that's one of the mysteries that we'll never solve. I don't believe, because the ability to say, I have all these coins, I know what this thing is capable of, and here it is, world, here's a gift to you. It's beyond comprehension. I don't have a good answer for you.
It really is.
It's just amazing.
It really is. And one of the themes for me as the years go on studying Bitcoin, Tim, is just how remarkable the origin story is and how unreplicable the origin story is. It is damn close to impossible to replicate. And that's why, I don't know who's best known for saying this. I think Livera has said this from time to time. A lot of people have echoed this sentiment of like, this is the shot we have. Bitcoin's not perfect. It's never going to be perfect, but this is the chance we have. And it's something we can build on. And that building on and that open source and that widespread accountability is why these systems like Linux work. But by the way, is it Linux or Linux?
Linux.
I've heard it pronounced both ways.
Okay.
The fact someone's like, these guys are fucking idiots. They don't even know how to pronounce Linux.
Whatever.
But my point
if you're such
was,
a nerd that you are worried about how we pronounce Linux, then
this
go
isn't
fuck
the show
yourself.
for you.
Try it
Yeah.
on some
This is not.
papyrus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the real discovery of Linux for someone that doesn't know anything about coding is
Speaking of.
is basically, I'm sure it was incredibly well constructed off the bat, but it's had so many people staring at it, looking at it, and improving it. That's the reason
Exactly.
it's such a robust OS.
Yes.
You also bring up in your book, Tim, the Wikipedia thing. A lot of people, like you highlighted people analyzing, and I've heard this other places too, like the accuracy of Wikipedia. It's actually incredibly accurate, and it stays up to date because it gets vetted so thoroughly, and it's everywhere but nowhere. Tons of human beings are looking at it.
Going back to what Josh said, the incentives are there for them to do that. The restrictions are lifted, and then imagine that. You got to have a positive outlook on society, like that people given the right conditions will make good choices. You got to start with that. And if you start with that mindset, then you're going to allow for people to flourish. But if you start with the mindset that, things are bad and I have to control others because if I don't, then it won't go to according to my plan. Well, that's where you have authoritarianism. That's where you have all of this control.
For sure. Walled gardens suck for a reason. I just thought of an example from my life. Not sure if I've told this story on this show before, but when I was in high school, I played on this intramural basketball team. It was actually at another high school. One of my buddies got a few friends together. It was like 10 dudes that thought we were pretty good at basketball, but we were all like pretty short, whatever. So we scrimmaged with each other for like, I think we met like 3 times. All we did was scrimmage with each other. And I remember on one of the nights we scrimmaged, we were all like, we are going to be fucking incredible this year. Like we are going to be hard to beat. Like these were the types of phrases that were coming out of people's mouths. We did not win a game. I think we went 0-10. We got destroyed. Okay. When we actually went out to play in competition, those scrimmages are like a walled garden closed system OS. It seems great in house. The whole team's vetted it. Experts have looked at it. Jump shot looks fantastic. I'm quick. I'm breaking ankles on other, 5'8" white dudes in a gym. Well, then you go out into the actual free market, the vicious tundra of intramural competition, and you realize, no, we actually suck. And so this is why systems like Bitcoin and increasingly NOSTR, moving very quickly, getting better very fast, right? Wikipedia, Linux, they end up getting better and better faster and exponentially, and they grow robust because they're not just scrimmaging with each other, stroking each other off. They're actually playing real life
systems.
Yeah, totally.
These evolutionary systems, you know, and you made mention in the book of birds, the way they flock. Like there's no centralized bird giving off, you know, actions on the front, like go right, go left, dive. These guys are just simply following the bird ahead of them. And I mean, you can watch it happen. It's an elegant movement that they all just instinctively make, it's simply following each other.
You got to trust and respect nature is going to do the right thing. And like we said, if we zoom out far enough, Bitcoin is the culmination of all of these properties coming together. And it's a natural discovery. It's not a fly by night. It's not a get rich quick scheme. It's none of that. You're looking too short term, and which is not their fault, because high time preference mindset is pretty prevalent in today's society because of the incentives brought on by fiat. But Bitcoin, it may not fix this, but it definitely incentivizes this. You know what I mean?
Agreed.
Love that phrase. We've done a lot of talking in this one, Tim. Thanks for letting us chop it up a lot on our own show here. What did is there anything we missed? Anything you really want to explore that you're like, hey, I got to get this in before we go?
No, man. No, I've had a blast, and I'm just grateful for the opportunity. I've been listening to you guys for years. I love your content. I'm just thank you so much. I appreciate that. Yeah. Thank you.
It was great meeting you in Miami. Yeah. Loved your book. We'll obviously link it. We'll have you send some of those articles you alluded to too. Yeah. I particularly want to hear the one about that gets into parenting a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll put those in the show notes as well.
Right on. I appreciate it.
Hand off to you though, formally for the audience. Where can they find you?
I'm at Twitter, X, whatever. Mama called him Twitter. I'm going to call him Twitter.
It's Twitter.
Tim _ Niemeyer _ I'm also on Nostr. Co-host Lincoln Land Bitcoin in Springfield. If you're ever here, swing on by. We meet once a month, usually first Monday of the month. Also just started creating content for Wiser, the educational Bitcoin app. So check me out over there. And probably going to, in the future, try and write a few more articles for Bitcoin Magazine. But otherwise, once it's the school year, you know, I'm all in on school right now. So catch me online.
Oh, yeah. All right, Tim, if I don't survive this wedding, it was nice meeting you.
It's a pleasure. It was an honor. Good luck with your white sheets.
It's time to go hydrate. Yep.
Start pounding waters.
Tim, thanks, man. We appreciate you.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks.